So, four things that I want to cover in my talk. First of all, water availability will change in the future. That's the first point that I want to talk to you about. And then I want to take an vivaciously business perspective, and I want to talk that is relevant for business because water is used in everything that we consume and in everything that we do. So if water is going to change, the third thing that I want to talk about is that changing water patterns creates some fantastic business opportunity, not just for consultants, not just for the water industry, but for business that makes things and supplies things. Conversely, it creates some headaches if organisations don't take that into account. And then last but not least, if we don't think that just business opportunity is going to drive things, then legislation will have a big impact as well. I just want to touch very briefly on that. So if you take nothing else away from the next 15 to 20 minutes, those are the 4 points of my talk, and you can avoid the question at the end. So, water will change and availability will change. Well, if you work in the industry, then you're probably used and you probably know this Environment Agency slide. Typically, globally, there is around about 8,000 cubic metres of water per person per year available across the world in terms of water availability. The UK, well, we're a pretty wet country, aren't we? But actually we're also quite a dense population as well. So if global average is 8,000 cubic metres of water per year, well in the UK we have around about 1,300. If you take on average how water stress and water scarcity is rated, well that stacks up against, I think it's something like 1,700 cubic metres of water per person per year. That is an indication of water scarcity, and then regions that have less than 1,000 cubic metres of water, that is the sort of the worst case scenario in terms of below that, then that really is considered to have some issues. So the UK at 1,300 cubic metres of water, well you can see that we're certainly above that 1,700 cubic metres of water stress, and we're not so far off that 1,000 cubic metres of water that would be water scarce. Compare that with some of our other countries. France, 3,000 cubic metres of water available per person per year. Spain, 2,700 cubic metres of water per person per year. We're significantly worse than that. If you want to take a bit more of an international perspective, then China, and northern China in particular, down at 750 cubic metres of water per person per year. So some really significant international challenges there. And that's the situation today. If you then think about how that is forecast to change in the future, UK climate projections. I'm assuming that most of you will have known about UK climate projections, government-funded forecast of what it is likely that climate will look like in the future, authoritative studies, probabilistic studies, and here is a central estimate of how average summer rainfall will change. Left-hand diagram 2050, right-hand diagram 2080. Now, probabilistic, it's a 50% likelihood that this will be the scenario in the future. But take a look at down in the southwest by 2050, potentially 50% likely on a high emission scenario, which is the scenario that we are on, that there will be up to 40% less rainfall in the summer in southwest England. That's a huge issue for water companies and a huge issue for business. And conversely, the same up in East Anglia, big source of if you're in farming, big issues there, that between 30 and 40% less water available by 2080 in terms of summer rainfall. So that's forecast. We're a water, we have just 1,300 cubic metres of water per person per year in the UK today, and it's forecast to get worse. And if you look across Europe, the same scenario applies in many countries. Southern Europe, you can see that that's more of a significant issue, but it's not entirely universal. So actually, we have some significant large teams in Sweden. Actually, forecasts for climate change show there'll be more water in Sweden with climate change than less. So for some regions, actually, it's climate change from a water perspective is a good thing. But for the UK, you can see significantly less, and for Southern Europe, some significant challenges there as well. And the same practice, the same philosophy across the world as well. I'm afraid this diagram doesn't have robust data for Oz, but you can certainly see the red areas here that there is extreme water stress forecast. Not entirely across all of the regions, but certainly across parts of Northern Africa. You can see China, you can see the Middle East. Some really significant water stress forecast due to climate change, and this is for the 2050s. So that's significant, and that matters. And business is taking action on that already. So, for example, if you talk to somebody like Standard Chartered Bank, they will not be lending on new residential developments in northwest China today. Why? Simply because they don't think that there is enough water available in the future to sustain those investments and developments that are going in today. And from a WSP perspective, we have a significant business down here in South Africa. We've just finished doing the climate adaptation strategy for Johannesburg. The biggest issue that we identify from Johannesburg is a huge migration to the city over the next 20 to 30 to 40 years, simply because marginal agricultural land becomes non-viable due to lack of rainfall over that period of time. So that is some significant issues, predominantly climate change causing water shortages and water stresses. So that therefore then becomes relevant for water companies, and it then becomes massively relevant for business. Let me then bring that back to you and me. Typically, you and me, we use round about 150 litres of water per day in the UK. So that's the washing machine, the shower you had this morning, toilet flushing, doing the washing up, etc., etc. 150 litres. But that's only really half the story, because if you think about the cereals you had this morning, or if you were lucky enough to have a bacon sarnie as you got up, the cup of coffee that you had, the cup of coffee that you had when you got off the train this morning, the lunch that you might have today, all of that has used water in the manufacture of those processes and to make the food that you use. So typically, a cup of coffee, 140 litres of water to make the coffee that you have used. So that's one cup of coffee, round about equal to your daily direct consumption. A lot of cotton shirts in the room. I don't want to steal Chris's thunder on this. He's next up. Typically, your cotton shirt around 2,500 litres of water to make that shirt. So, if you then stack that up together, you and me, we have a direct water footprint of about 150 litres of water a day. But when you think about the water it's taken to make the stuff that you and I use, the food and the things that we buy, then typically that's round about 4,200 litres of water per person per day for you and me as UK citizens. And that's a whole lot of a bigger number. And that's where it's relevant for business, because you can apply exactly the same principles to business in terms of thinking about where do their whole life water footprints come into play. And so that's where I want to share with you some of the work that we're doing with companies. So, it's relevant for business because traditionally, if we talk to companies about running water footprints, the good old typical would be, how much water are you using in your factory? Or if you're a retailer, how much water are you using in terms of your staff facilities, in terms of flushing the loos, in terms of cleaning, in terms of your canteens? And that's all terribly interesting, and yes, it's a bigger number, and EnviroWise will tell you to cut your water consumption, etc., etc. But the reality is that's all pretty operational, and for many of the companies that we deal with, that's pretty much a routine, day-to-day, non-board level issue. What becomes a whole lot more significant is to think about So if there are changing patterns of water availability across the world, how does that impact on the security of our supply chain, and how does that impact on the things that we're buying? So if I am a Kenyan coffee grower, for example, our research shows that you are probably quite unlikely to be growing coffee in Kenya with climate change in 25 years' time, simply because water is going to become more stressed in that region. The cocoa industry becoming very conscious of this. They have some sustainability programs with their supply chains, and for them it is water and it's pesticides in their supply chain. That is the biggest sustainability issue for the cocoa industry. The same also for our cotton shirt providers. If you're sourcing your cotton from Egypt, well, Egypt is forecast to be an extremely water-stressed country in the future. So therefore, that might raise questions about whether you need to be taking steps to de-risk your supply chain so that you're not solely dependent on water security in Egypt to guarantee your supply chain. So our experience shows that if you look at water footprints across a company, there is far, far, far more water consumed in making the things that companies are buying rather than the direct water that they are using themselves. This figure, just to be clear, is for a Greek retailer that we did a fairly brief water footprint for. So we looked at water in their operations. We also looked at water in making the things that they are buying. And then last but not least, we also looked at when customers get their products home, how much water is used in the goods that this retailer was selling to their customers over the course of their life. And that becomes incredibly potent, because not only can you then say, okay, the water is also, the biggest issue is in our supply chain. You can then also start looking at, okay, so if that's the total footprint, you can then start saying, so where are we buying those goods from? And we have maps, and there are maps available that show which are the water catchments that are in the water-stressed regions, and so therefore, which of your products are you sourcing? One, which have a big water footprint, and secondly, which are most risky because you are sourcing those from water-stressed areas. And so therefore, that allows, in this case, for example, companies to start saying, okay, our sugar and our meat processing has a big water footprint, and we're sourcing those from South America, and those are the key areas where there is risk for us. So that will be the area that we focus on in terms of de-risking our business from a water perspective. And that's an entirely different conversation and a far more strategic conversation, the one that is just solely based on how do we reduce the water in the canteens of our retail facilities. It's a much more strategic decision, it's a much more risk management decision, and fundamentally it's much more one which is around creating opportunity as well. So, for business, water has four main areas of importance. First of all, de-risking supply chains, probably the biggest issue that we are working with companies on. Secondly, reducing consumption in your own operations. Thirdly, in terms of spotting opportunities for low water products before customers. So to give you an example, I'm looking at the moment at buying a new washing machine. That's a fairly routine purchase. The one I'm looking at uses 50 litres of water per wash. Conversely, compare that with a technology that was patented by Leeds University last year that uses around about a cupful of water to do the same wash. Now, that's not on the market today, but if you're betting on the fact that water is going to become a whole lot more scarce in the future, isn't that a fantastic disruptive technology that if you're a commercial enterprise operating in that area, that's a strategic opportunity solely predicated around water as an opportunity to create shareholder value for your customers. And so that's a third area for us to be talking and for you to be talking to business about. And then exactly the same around broader investment opportunities for banks to spot and support those low water opportunities which we would suggest is an area that is much less researched, much less looked at than the blizzard of investments around low carbon and renewables technologies at the moment. And I would argue that both are potentially as important. So, 4 key topics. Water availability will change. This matters because water is used in all that we consume. Changing water patterns will create significant business opportunities, but that requires organisations to be clear and to be imaginative. And then just a last piece on legislation. You've heard a little bit about the Murray-Darling Basin from Stuart. Well, in the UK, water trading exists in law today. The Cave Review suggested that should be made a whole lot more easy to do. So water rights trading potentially important. And if you just think that it's still just a peripheral element, well, around product manufacture, energy using products regulations now specifies minimum requirements not just for energy consumption in electronic products, but also around water. And that's relevant because we've just completed a study that shows that if you and I go and buy a 29-inch LCD television, that the whole life water footprint of that TV will be around about 62,000 litres of water over the lifetime of you buying and using that LCD TV. And you wouldn't have a clue about that unless you've done that research. So new legislation will drive not just direct consumption of water, but will also drive the amount of water that is used in products. So, I'm probably about done. Paul's probably going to tell me to sit down in just a second, but I know I want your opinion, including the people who are standing at the back. So you have there is an option to vote. So first of all, is water more important than carbon? That's your option 1. I'm going to come to a vote on this in a second. Option 2, I've spent the last 20 minutes talking complete rubbish, and carbon is more important than water. Option 3, you're going to sit on the fence and you're going to say they're both as important. Option 4, you're really sitting on the fence and you're going to say I don't know. So let's have a final show of hands. So option 1, which ones of you think water actually is more important than carbon? Oh, you've been listening. Well done. Okay. Option 2, carbon is more important than water. A couple of low hands. Very well. Good opinions. Good opinions. Option 3, they're both as important. Okay, a close second at the moment. And option 4, you don't know. Okay. Not a bad call either. So, on that basis, ladies and gents, thank you very much. I think we have a clear winner that water is more important than carbon, and thanks very much for your attention.